The 6 living generations of America. Each generation is shaped differently. It is based off their collective experiences as they are molded and influenced by the people around them. Generations choose to adopt similar ideas to those of previous generations, but they also disregard norms they do not see fit in their society. The GI generation was born between 1901 and 1926. This generation underwent the Great Depression and fought through World War II. The GI generation are children of the World War I veterans, and a majority of the men and women in this generation enlisted to help in World War II. Because their youth was spent in the early years of the Great Depression and their adulthood was spent at war, they created values that are aimed towards saving the world and building a better nation together. This generation has a strong pride for civic duty. They hold an interest in personal morality and have standards for what is right and wrong. They believe everyone's voice counts and encourage others to vote. They hold high spiritual values. They are traditional and strongly prefer being married only once in their lifespan. Divorce, same-sex marriage, and having children out of matrimony is looked down upon amongst their generation. They are known as the no-retirement generation. Many of them work until death or until they are forced to retire. Their generation's motto is use it up, fix it up, make it do or do without. They are accustomed to avoiding debt and learn to save and buy everything with cash when it is possible. This generation grew up in an era where the new inventions of their time were radio transmissions and air flight. Next is the silent generation, which was born between 1927 and 1945. This generation fought in the Cold War. In their time, civil rights movements for gender equality were very active. Feminism was being established, and pre-feminist women who stayed at home to raise children began to work as teachers, as nurses, or as secretaries to have individual income. Men in this generation pledged a lifetime loyalty to the corporation they worked for. This meant that once they got their job, they kept them for the duration of their working career. Like the GI generation, the silent generation also held high spiritual values and saw marriage as something sacred between man and woman. Divorce and having children out of marriage was looked down upon. The idea of retirement in this generation was living at peace. They are the richest, most free-spending retirees in history, holding on to accumulated war bonds from previous generations for wealth. Following the silent generation is the baby boomers, who were born between 1946 and 1964. There are two sublets for this generation. People born from the 50s to the 60s were the Save the World revolutionaries, and people born from the 60s to the early 70s were the party hard, career climbing generation. They valued credit more than cash and spent more than they had. They had low spiritual values, but this generation, like many before, held strong desires to change the common values for the good of all. Many mothers were generally housewives, but women were able to have the choice to work outside of the home. This was the first generation where children were raised in a dual-income household. The idea of retirement is living to the fullest for this generation. They brought a new meaning to the phrase, a life after children. This generation is very active in their older age, and many take on hobbies, exercises, and fun activities to increase their lifespan. Next is Generation X, which are those born between 1965 and 1980. They were nicknamed the latchkey kids because many kids would walk home with key lanyards around their neck to no parents at home, a practice that wasn't familiar to older generations. The kids in this generation grew up street smart, but were isolated by divorce or career-driven parents. Many would go home from school to an empty house because their parents would be at work. Many in this generation claim that they are misunderstood by other generations. Political movements and corporations? What are those? Gen Xers wanted to save their neighborhoods, not the world, and because of this, many do not believe in climate change. Gen Xers average 7 career changes in their lifespan, because unlike previous generations, they did not want to work for the same company all their life. They sparked a new generation of learning. The introduction of digital technology in the classroom was first integrated for Gen Xers in middle school or high school. Gen Xers, like many other generations, had the desire to learn, explore, and make a contribution. Known as the single parent generation, Gen Xers were late to marry and quick to divorce. As a result of this, single parenting rate is higher amongst this generation. Generation Y includes those born between the years 1981 to 2000. This generation is known as the Eco Boomers, or the post 9/11 generation. The generation of today is perceived to be nurtured by their parents, full of optimism and focused. In this generation, we can see a decline in crime rates and a decline in teen pregnancies. The millennials of today have a strong urge to save the earth. And unlike Gen Xers, they have brought awareness to the realities of climate change. This generation wants fast facts, and they have strong views. Many millennials prefer digital literacy over textbooks and enjoy news at a fast pace. As a result of this, millennials use social media in everyday lives to stay connected with worldly and community news. Unlike other generations, they look down upon non-eco-friendly practices. This generation is different from others in the workforce. They have been told over and over again that they are special, and they expect the world to treat them that way. They want work life to be a relaxed environment with accommodations for them. Finally is Generation Z, which are those born in the years 2001 to present day. Generation Z is very unique. It is changing the American melting pot. In 2006, there were a record number of births in the United States, and 49% of those births were Hispanic. These births can bring a change in behavior and culture in America. The number of births in 2006 were a record 75.4 million births, surpassing the baby boomers' old record of 74.9 million births. Like Generation Y, Generation Z is accustomed to electronics. In this generation, children have become less concerned with toys and have moved on to electronics as early as 5 years old. A study shows that 61% of children in the United States aged 8 to 17 have television in their rooms. These millennials haven't known a world without the internet or cell phones, and about 35% of Generation Z have video games. Generation Z are the largest consumers of the American market. Spending for the rising millennials of today accumulates to about $221 billion annually. All of these generations interact with one another to complete a mutual goal: to make home a better place to be.